Ladies and gents, boys and girls, welcome to the March 23 update on the performance of my solar array. So I'm sorry this video is a little bit delayed, I've just been snowed under with a million things, but let's get straight into it. So first of all, the disclaimer, please pause and read. I'm not an expert, there could be mistakes in what I'm saying, and I'm just sharing my experiences with you. I see many of you have started switching to Octopus and have been using my referral link, so thank you very much. If you do want to switch to Octopus, if you use the link or the code that you see there on the screen, you will receive a £50 discount off your first bill, and so will I. If you don't know, recently Octopus have released a new tariff called Intelligent Octopus. What this does is give you 6 hours of off-peak electricity at the cheaper rate, and it links to your electric car, so it's smart. And what you do is you tell it that I need my battery to be X percentage charged by this time in the morning. And then Octopus will figure out when to charge your car. Even if that means charging the car at peak time, that's when they'll charge the car, but they'll charge you the off-peak rate. So for example, if you come home at 7 PM and plug in your car, and you want it charged to 80% by 7 AM, between that 7 PM and 7 AM window, Octopus will decide when to charge your car, but whenever it does charge your car in that window, it will charge you the off-peak price. So, something to look into. It's a relatively new tariff. I've switched onto it and I'm experimenting, so I'll update you next month to let you know how it goes. Okay, let's get straight into the numbers. So, an update on voltage. So in January, the grid made an adjustment at my local transformer. It's like a manual adjustment, and they say they stepped it down the max they could possibly do. And if I was continuing to experience a problem, then what they need to do is go further upstream to the substation where they have an automatic voltage controller and make some adjustments there. So I sent them the updated graphs. I said, look, it's improved, but we're still experiencing some spikes here. At the same time, they did some investigation and they discovered that there is some improvements or a problem that they can rectify at the substation. So they were scheduling that in early April. So we'll find out maybe next month if there's been any improvements. But as you can see from this chart, the crazy spikes that we experienced late November, which kind of started this whole thing off, has moved back down, and the average voltage is around 242, which is what UK Power Networks target to deliver. But we do still see some spikes outside of the legal limit up here, and a few are now appearing below the legal limit down there because we've moved the average. So UK Power Networks, they sent the engineer out. He says, look, this is a thing which is a bit difficult to avoid because the grid was never designed to have electric cars all plugging in, demanding a lot of electricity all in one go overnight, and it was never designed for all of this sensitive equipment to be plugged in at home. So there's more for them to scratch their head and figure out, but we are seeing an improvement. I'm seeing my system trip out less, or I'm hardly even noticing if it's caused a problem. Okay, let's move on to the numbers. So over the lifetime of having this system, we have generated 7,022 kilowatt hours through to the end of March 2023. And then I'm going to focus on all the numbers on the right hand half of this screen because the stuff on the left hasn't changed. So year to date, we have produced 838 kilowatt hours. That compares to 876 from the year before. So we're a bit behind. We're 38 kilowatt hours down this year, or 4.3%. That's despite having 4 extra panels on the summer house. This, I think, is down to the fact that last March was particularly sunny, and this March it has been particularly gloomy and rainy. So we're not kind of beating last year's record. Looking at the electricity that we've imported, so last year we imported 3,080 in total. This year we've imported 2,597 kilowatt hours already. So that's an increase of 944 kilowatt hours year to date. Or year on year, it's an increase of 1,653. So this is a massive, massive increase, and the reason is this time last year we weren't charging the electric car because we were able to use solar power, and we had some free miles that were provided by the manufacturer. Second of all, we had 1 battery. Now we've got 2 batteries that I'm charging up overnight. And third of all, this time last year, I had not yet installed the eddy. So the eddy is burning through about 8 or 9 kilowatts every night, heating up hot water. So we've placed all this additional demand onto our electricity supply, and the solar power can't meet it. But it's intentional because it's cheaper than paying for peak time electricity, or cheaper than paying for diesel, or cheaper than paying for gas. So if we go and talk about gas, this year we have consumed 12,941 kilowatt hours. This time last year we had consumed 13,159. So we're down 218 kilowatt hours, or 1.7%. So it's a small saving, but it's a good saving, and it's partly because I'm using the eddy to heat hot water, so it's using less gas, and I would hope that we are doing something to save a bit of energy with insulation and things like that. But I think it's been particularly cold beginning to this year compared to last year. No more capital expenditure this year. And then to talk about OPEX, year to date we have saved £1,188. That goes back in the pot to help pay off the system. This time last year we had only saved 188. So we have saved an additional £1,000 year to date already. Okay, so that's huge, and everything I just mentioned, the car, the battery, heating the hot water, is all contributing towards that. Okay, the usual analytics. So first of all, the chart is totally useless this month, and it's because Give Energy do a weird thing with the numbers every time you change a setting there. So I think I had the same problem in February, which made it useless, and I have the same problem again in March because we rectified the problem. So first let me talk about the problem. If you recall, I noticed that the production from those 4 new solar panels was not being reported properly in the Enphase kind of analytics, both in the app or on the Enlighten portal. It was reporting the exact amount that those 4 panels in the southwest array produced as export. Even though we weren't exporting, we were consuming in the house, it was reporting it as export. So it's taken me 2 months of going back and forward with Enphase to figure out what's going on. I spoke to a few people who were helpful and did things like firmware updates, but that didn't solve the problem. I got some folks saying, this is how it is, tough luck. And finally I got hold of somebody who was quite knowledgeable and told me, first of all, the way that Enphase calculates production is based on the CT clamps. Even if you have the setting in the toolkit set to use the microinverter to tell you the production, the analytics doesn't care about that. It uses the CT clamp. Now in my setup, the CT clamp for production covers all of these panels over here which are on the roof, but I don't have an Enphase CT clamp covering these 4 panels, and that's purely because physically these panels are located miles away from these ones, and trying to do a cable run from here back to where the Envoy gateway is kept was going to be very, very difficult. And that's why the setting which says I can use the microinverter to measure production was perfect. It's only afterwards that we discovered, well, regardless of that setting, the analytics doesn't depend on it. The other thing the Enphase engineer told me is that although there's only 1 terminal on the Envoy for a CT clamp to plug in, I can wire in multiple wires into the same terminal. Now, some of the previous engineers categorically told me this was not possible. The other spare terminals there are for other phases. Now, in my case, I have a single phase supply, so they're redundant. But what none of them were knowledgeable about or told me is that what I can do is put in more than 1 CT clamp into the same terminal, and the Envoy is smart enough to realize that there's multiple CT clamps plugged in, and it takes the different readings and it adds it all together. They also insisted I have to use an Enphase branded CT. Well, here in the UK, those are very hard to get hold of. Basically, nobody's got them in stock, and the few people who have want to charge you £60-70 for a CT clamp, which is a stupid amount of money. Other manufacturers charge £15 to £20 for a CT clamp, which is reasonable. So I searched around, I couldn't find an Enphase CT, but I did have a spare My Energy CT clamp. So what I decided to do is plug that in instead and connect it up and see what happens. And lo and behold, it works, and it's reporting the production pretty accurately. So much so that I've put finding an Enphase CT on the back burner. But if any of you happen to have a spare Enphase CT and feel like donating it to me or letting me purchase it from you at a sensible price, please get in touch and I will do something about it. but otherwise I have an Enphase CT connected. Now you might be asking, how did I manage to connect this up, because I can't run a wire? Well, the way I did it is there is a fuse box located in the summer house where these panels are. So I put the CT around that cable. And then from the summer house, we actually have a spare Ethernet cable which runs all the way back into the main house, upstairs where we locate our switch. And, you know, if those of you know how to network, whenever you're running cables, especially Ethernet, you always put a spare one in, even if you can't foresee what it might be for. So there was a spare one there. So I connected the CT clamp to a couple of the strands in there. That got it all the way back to my switch. And then from my switch, I had a cable which went into the loft. And so I made a connection and I used that. I got the cable all the way to where the Envoy's connected. Now, it's not ideal to have connections in it, but this is the only way I could do it. And I did it, and it happens to work. So, fantastic. All right, let's get back to the numbers you see here on the screen. So some of them are kind of junk because of what Enphase have done. When you switch the setting between using the microinverter and the CT clamp to measure import, export, and production, Enphase does something weird like this, and it takes your lifetime of data and dumps it onto one day. No idea why. I've questioned them on it. I've asked them if they can do some sort of override and get this back to normal, and they say they can't. So this is what it looks like. But anyway, in the month of March, we produced 398.3 kilowatt hours. That number is accurate. We exported 124.4. So this is kind of inaccurate because the first half of March up until this crazy bar, these numbers are incorrect. But then the second half of March, where I've made the fix, these numbers would be correct. So we'll look at the data which comes from my smart meter instead. Grid dependence number will be totally wrong, but the numbers on the far right hand side will be correct. This is how much each panel has contributed during the month. So the good news is the panels on my roof on the southeast array do about the same as the panels on the summer house on the southwest array. The northwest array is obviously pointing in the wrong direction, and we have that one panel which gets a lot of shading from the neighbour's dormer, so it's not doing much. But overall, all these few kilowatt hours, they eventually add up into something useful. And I think, if I remember correctly, our grid dependence is somewhere around 50%. Those are the real numbers for March, but we'll come to it in a minute. Best and worst days. So the best day was the 27th of March. We produced 32.4 kilowatts. We exported 4.9. We imported 51.7, meaning our house consumed 79.2 in that day. Now, the reason the import is so high is because we're charging the car, charging the battery, and the hot water all overnight on the cheap tariff. And now we have 6 hours of cheap tariff because I'm on Intelligent Octopus, so I can do even more. We have a little bit of export, more than we'd like, because we are now maxing out our battery, roughly by lunchtime, and we've heated our hot water, and the car is not plugged in. Therefore, the only option is to sell it back to the grid. So that's why we are starting to see some export here. What I'm doing to counter this is the overnight charge in the battery. I'm reducing this down so it doesn't charge up the battery very much, so that the solar power has space to go into it during the day. So I've currently got the battery set to charge to only 25% at night time, and that covers me for these few hours until about 7 a.m, 7:30, when the solar power kicks in and takes over. And as we continue to go, I'm going to continue reducing that number further and further. The worst day then was the 8th of March. We only produced 2.3 kilowatt hours. Again, we were charging the battery in the car and heating the hot water overnight, but I think it was doom and gloom that day, and so we hardly produced anything. Alright, if you're finding this useful, please do consider liking and subscribing. It helps me out a lot, and it also means you'll get notifications when I've uploaded new videos and new content. Alright, let's talk about household electricity consumption. So we're looking at the bar on the far right hand side for the month of March. So from all the electricity that we imported, 326 kilowatts of that was used to power our house. Okay, this is all the kind of regular gadgets, internet, Wi-Fi, oven, whatever's plugged into the house normally. The rest of the house was powered by 272 kilowatt hours worth of solar power. We put 323 kilowatts of off-peak electricity into the car. we put a tiny sliver of solar power into the car. We then have 153 kilowatts of off-peak electricity going into the eddy, and then we have a tiny sliver of solar power which found its way into the eddy. And then this dark red box over here is peak time electricity going into the car. Now the reason we have this, it's not desirable, there's a couple of reasons. The smart technology with the car and the charger doesn't always work perfectly, and because it's set to charge in the middle of the night, if it doesn't work, I don't realise until the morning. And I've had a few occasions where I've needed a fully charged battery and I've discovered that the car didn't start charging overnight for whatever reason, or it stopped charging at 60 or 70% when I needed it to get to 100. So when I realised in the morning, I set it to charge at full power, and so then I'm paying for peak time electricity from the grid. Now, given that I'm going to need a full battery, even though I'm paying for peak time electricity, it's still cheaper than paying for electricity from a public charging point. So that's why we have this going on. Okay, moving on to talk about gas consumption. So for the month of March, we've used a tiny bit more gas than the month of February. Keep in mind, we've got a few extra days in the month of March, so I would say it's pretty much the same. And consumption is about 50-50. The kind of green section, I don't know why it's gone green in this one, it should be blue. This is the main portion of our house, and the red section is the secondary portion of our house. So you can see that there's still the secondary portion, which is north facing, still uses a bit too much power, and I'm finding ways to get it down. But it's interesting to see that compared to previous times, the ratios now become about 50-50. Whereas before I would say it was more like 60-40. So that means we are reducing the power consumption or the gas consumption in this section of the house. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the bill from Octopus. So for the month of March, we paid £229 for gas for the main portion of our house, £215 for the north-facing portion of our house, and we paid £101 for all of that electricity that we imported. For the few kilowatts of electricity that we did give back to the grid, they paid us £1.31. Okay, so if you do want to switch to Octopus, here's the link again, and here's the code. Just give them a call, quote this number, or type this link out into your browser, and you will automatically have the £50 applied, and it gets applied to your account as soon as you make the first payment. Talking about My Energy then, so here is the chart of power going into the My Energy. This is a combination of solar power and charging from the grid overnight. It's pretty much the same as every other month. Okay, this is interesting. So talking about the installer estimates, let's start on the left hand side. The headline is we've produced 7,022 kilowatt hours. By the end of year 2, the installer expects us to have produced 9,832 kilowatt hours. So we are currently at 71% of target, and we have over 6 months left to go, or 8 months to go in this calendar year. So like last year, I expect we're going to surpass this and surpass it quite dramatically, especially as you can see the curve now on this graph is starting to curve up again as the production ramps up into the summer months. So this is data for the end of March. I would expect by the end of July, we should have hit 100% of target again. Looking at this chart then, so the 2022 consumption target from our installer was 2,458 kilowatts. The 22 production estimate and the 23 consumption estimate was 4,916 because it's just double. The consumption estimate is double this and the production estimate is double that. And then for 23, our production target is up here. Okay, so the curve is looking good. We're doing well. We're at 92% of consumption. That's how it is in the winter. We'll see how we're doing in terms of improving. But the game plan with this graph is you want the green to consume as much of this blue. You don't really want to see much blue. That means we're not sending power back to the grid. So looking on the right hand side, consumed versus the installer estimate. By the end of year 2, we should have consumed 4,916. We've actually consumed 6,557. So we're already at 133% of target. Okay, and here is that 92% consumption, as in we've consumed 92% of everything we produced in the month of March. So the key point of this slide, the purpose I show is to prove to you that the installer's estimates that they give you are generally extremely conservative, and in my case I've already beaten year two's estimate with 8 months of year 2 to go, and in terms of a production estimate we are well on the way there, and we should hit that target roughly 6 months or 5 months before the installer thinks. Okay, so when you're calculating your payback, this is an important detail because it's proving to you that I will hit payback quicker than what the installer forecasts. Alright, and finally let's look at the payback curve. I mean, there's no curve anymore, it's just a big table, but let's read through the numbers. So I'm looking on the far right hand side. We're going to go through the numbers for March 2023. So we produced 398.3 kilowatt hours, we exported 32 kilowatt hours, therefore the house, therefore we consumed in total 366.3 kilowatt hours. Of that, 272 went into the house, 50 or 51 went into the eddy, and 42 or 43 went into the car. We imported from the grid 908 kilowatt hours total. This metric comes from my energy supplier, Octopus. And we imported 4,154 kilowatt hours of gas from the grid. There's no more capital expenditure, so the total expenditure sits at 23,490. The unit prices have stayed the same for the month of March. There are updates coming for the month of April. So now if we talk about how much money we've saved, so the house has saved £84 by using solar power versus paying for electricity from the grid, and that's just in the month of March. We've saved a further £76 by being on the Octopus Go tariff. So that enables us to charge the battery and discharge it, basically meaning we pay a quarter of the price we would have otherwise been paying. By putting solar power into the eddy, we have saved £5.25, and by using the eddy to heat hot water on the overnight tariff, we have saved £4.30 worth of gas. In terms of export, we have we've received £1.31 for exporting electricity to the grid. And then when we talk about the electric car, so charging the car using solar power has saved us £4.42. Using peak time electricity, it's cost us £32 to charge the car. Using off-peak electricity, it's cost us £24 to charge the car. Using the public charging point, it's cost us £47 to charge a car. And therefore the grand total is a saving of £314. This takes into account the diesel number that you're going to see next. So had we done all of these miles in my previous diesel car, it would have cost us £414 worth of diesel for the month of March. So when you net all these numbers together, we have saved £314. Okay, so it's the 414 minus all of these costs, and we get to £314 saved. So it's basically cost us a quarter of the price to use the electric car. So total OPEX savings £485, cumulative £4,001. We therefore have a balance of £19,489 to go to break even. We've paid off 20% of our system, and therefore we predict break even will be in 8 years, 1 month and 24 days. And I say 8 years from the beginning, from the day the system was installed, and it's been installed a year and a half now. So we're another 6.5 years roughly away from breaking even. And keep in mind the installer told me it would be around 18 years. So I've lopped 10 years off it. Of course I've improved the system by having a battery, an additional battery and an eddy, which they hadn't accounted for, but they were still miles off in their estimate. Okay, and that's the summary for the month of March. So please remember to like and subscribe. Feel free to put any comments, leave postings on how much you produced in your area for the month of March, and I'll catch you in the next video.